may I have the privilege of inviting Honorable MP to please come and address us on this and whatever he feels. He's a great expert on geostrategy. So, all of you, please put your hands together and let's welcome our teacher. Thank you, sir.
General KJ Singh, Professor Dinu Dogra, Lieutenant General J.S. Bajwa, Lieutenant General S.K. Saini, Ambassador Mandeep Singh, the anchor of this program, Shri Mohit ji, and everybody who has taken the time out to be present here for this academic deep dive into the strategic flux in the Middle East. I was quite surprised when I got an invitation from General KJ Singh. And the invitation said that they are going to have a seminar on the Middle East in the Postgraduate Government College for Girls. As someone who's unfortunately a regular on the circuit, this is the first also for me that a college has enough students, enough young people who are interested in hearing about what is happening in lands afar, but which has a direct implication and bearing on India's economic and strategic security, in addition to, of course, the choices that we make. I must compliment General KJ Singh and his colleagues before I commence for really taking the initiative of not keeping the think tank to a cloistered forum of experts who talk amongst themselves and end up enriching each other with their perspectives, but opening the doors of the think tank and really allowing young people, young scholars, those who have an interest in the world, to become a part of this community. I think this is a great service which Gyan Setu is not only doing to young people, to academic institutions in Chandigarh, but also I do hope that you would widen the scope of your interaction and also take within your purview colleges and universities across the region, most of them who would really benefit from the wealth of knowledge which is available in this part of the country, especially in terms of those people who've spent an entire lifetime in the service of this country, whether in the armed forces or in the diplomatic arena or in the administrative services, and who have a lot to contribute in terms of what they have really imbibed in the course of their long professional career and are willing to share the wealth of that information with younger people who would obviously be the inheritors of our tomorrow and would take forward the burden which a generation before me carried, passed on to our generation, and that is the burden that we would be passing on to the next generation to really shape the future and destiny of this country. This is for the first time after the end of the Second World War that you have three concurrent conflicts playing themselves out in three different geographies, which have a direct bearing on reshaping international relations or the post World War II and the post Cold War order as we've known it over the past 7 decades. So you have the Russia Ukraine conflict, which has been in play since the 27th of February 2022. Then you have the Israel Hamas and by extension, Houthi, Hezbollah, proxies of Iran conflict in the Middle East, which has been playing itself out since the 7th of October 2023. And of course, you have the perennial tensions in North Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Asia, which in South Asia, which are conjoined with the ascendancy of President Xi Jinping as the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party in the October of 2012, and then of course as the President of the of the Chinese state from the March of 2030. But if one was to go back specifically into the topic of today's seminar, that is the geopolitical flux in the Middle East, well, things didn't start today. If any of you do get a chance to go to Jerusalem and go to the old city of Jerusalem, so there are 4 quarters out there. There is the Latin quarter, there is the Armenian quarter, there is the Christian quarter, and there is the Muslim quarter. And as you go around the old city of Jerusalem, it gives you a perspective that conflicts which started millennia ago still continue to manifest themselves in some form or the other. And what you see playing itself out in the greater Middle East today actually has its origins going all the way back to the biblical times, when the Jewish people were actually forced out of what was their homeland then into 2 exiles. The first in the 6th century BC, or well, it's not called BC any longer, but we will use that terminology, and the 70th century AD. But the origins of the current conflict actually go back to the propensity of the Western powers to reorder the Middle East post the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans was this great empire which was based out of or run out of Constantinople, later called Istanbul, a very, very beautiful city. And it stretched both into Asia and into Europe. But as it happens with all empires, that when that particular empire started dying out, or in the later part of the 19th century was called the sick man of Europe, the others who wanted to share the spoils of the booty or of the weakening of the Ottoman Empire sat down to carve up the great Middle East, namely Mr. Sykes and Mr. Picot, and drew lines and made Westphalian entities across the Middle East. That is the cause of most of the conflict today. Coupled with that, for centuries, because the Jews, when they were forced to flee from, when they were forced to flee from the Middle East, from the biblical lands, and they scattered all over Europe and North Africa, there commenced a process of persecution, which is loosely termed as anti-Semitism. And this anti-Semitism by 1895-96 gave rise to the first Zionist International, a movement aimed at creating a homeland for the Jewish people. And in 1918, you had the very famous Balfour Declaration, whereby Britain officially promised the Jews a homeland. Of course, it's another story of chicanery, because the British concurrently were promising the same piece of geography to the to the Sharif of Mecca. They were also promising the same piece of geography to other players in the Arab world, and of course, they were telling the Jews that you'll eventually get a homeland. Had it not been for the unfortunate events which started unfolding in 1933 with the rise of Adolf Hitler as the Chancellor of Nazi Germany, which resulted in the most horrific Holocaust that any peoples could have faced, that tragedy eventually brought the Israeli state into existence when the British Mandate expired in 1948 in, in what is even now called the land of Palestine. Going back to 1948, the Arab states have always or tried to make a consistent effort to try and see that the Israeli state ceases to exist. The two-state solution, which the United Nations had midwifed in 1948, never fructified into reality, not because so much that the Israelis were very aggressive, which they had the right to be, given that they were a persecuted people who were fighting for existence. But none of the other Arab states around Palestine were really ever committed to Palestine coming into existence. I remember this story. I used to head the International Union of Students way back in 1992. We were headquartered in Prague, and we had Chairman Arafat. He was chairman of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, come and visit us. His head of security was a gentleman called Dr. Ibrahim. And Dr. Ibrahim was a nuclear physicist who later on became a very close friend of mine. And one day we were sitting in a cafe outside in the center of Prague, and he asked me a rhetorical question which he answered himself. He says, "Why do you think a Palestinian state doesn't come into existence?" And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because the Arabs don't want it. Look, if a Palestinian state does come into existence and the Palestinian diaspora returns to the West Bank and to the Gaza Strip, where is that state going to expand into? It will expand into Jordan, it will expand into Syria, it will expand into Lebanon." And so for 7 decades, while the world has really been paying lip service to the Palestinian cause, the commitment has been lacking. They have not really walked the talk. And so therefore, here we are in 2024 or 25 with a very tenuous peace or a tenuous ceasefire between Israel and Hamas being in play. But one has to essentially rewind back to what triggered the 7th October 2023 attack by the Hamas on Israel. So there was a process of a grand reconciliation taking place in the Middle East. So you had the Abraham Accords, whereby countries such as the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, they recognized the existence of Israel. And simultaneously, a process was playing itself out, which would have been the biggest grand bargain, or which may still be the biggest grand bargain, were it to succeed, the reconciliation or the recognition of the Israeli state by Saudi Arabia. Now, for hardline Palestinian elements, this recognition really would have meant the death knell of the Palestinian cause. And therefore, to ensure that the Palestinian question remained front and center of the political firmament in the Middle East, they carried out the most horrendous and audacious attack possible. Nothing can really justify the killing of innocent civilians, the taking of hostages in the manner it was done. And that is not, that in no way is a condemnation of what the Israelis did in retaliation, which is that they've effectively wiped out the Gaza Strip. Now, you have a strange set of circumstances. You know, the October 7th attack triggered off a strange train of events, which again has its genesis in somebody after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire trying to reorganize the Middle East once again. And that was the project for a new American century, which inaugurated President Bush 43's 4 years, the first 4 years in the White House. And therefore, the intervention by the United States into Iraq, which had nothing to do in 2003, which had nothing to do with the 9/11 attack, ended up inadvertently strengthening the presence of Iran and the formation of a Shia crescent, which went across the Middle East and actually started acting as a glue for Shia minorities who had been suffering under Sunni oppression, if I can put it in those terms, in many states around the Middle East. And therefore, the Iranians created these proxies, the Hezbollah, the Houthis, and various other groups in Iraq, in Syria, in other places in the Middle East. And so therefore, you had the conflict widening itself, with the Houthis coming into play, based in Yemen, with the Hezbollah coming into play, and Israel and its allies, and which is not confined to the United States or Great Britain alone, but people who have a convergence of interest, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and some of the other Arab states, really coming together, not so much overtly as covertly, in trying to ensure that these forces are neutralized. And therefore, the flux which has been created in the Middle East is a consequence of various historical, sociological, ethnic forces which have been at play now for almost a century. So if you try and unscramble this egg, it is something which is not going to happen. And so therefore, what is the way forward? And the way forward is that if this peace holds, and you have some moderate forces coming up in West Bank and the Gaza. President Mahmoud Abbas is 86 years old. He's kind of done with his political life. There is an emerging vacuum in West Bank. The Hamas has again demonstrated during the hostage swap that it is far from being finished. And so therefore, there is no other force which is there in the Gaza Strip which can really replace the Hamas. So after all the destruction which Israel unleashed since the 7th of October 2023, which is now almost a year and 4 months, the Hamas as a political force has still not been destroyed. The Hezbollah may have lost its head, Mullah Nasrullah. General Soleimani of the Quds force may have been neutralized a couple of years back, but the Iranian influence is still alive and kicking. So, under those circumstances, there are two reconciliations which are required for stability and peace in the Middle East. A reconciliation which is in the works between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the two principal Shia and Sunni states in that region, and a reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Were these two reconciliations to play themselves out and a tenuous cold peace were to hold for at least 5 years, you could really see the reorganization of the political dynamics of the Middle East. And so, therefore, before I conclude, what is India's stake in all this? Well, our stake is very simple, that we are hydrocarbon dependent. Our economy is fueled by the crude which comes out of the greater Middle East. The person who was presenting the academic part of it was absolutely spot on. The Straits of Hormuz and the Straits of Bandar are the two choke points. If at some point in time they shut down, it effectively shuts down the economy of India, China, South Korea, Japan. So therefore, the two big dilemmas of the world, which really keep the wheels of the economy turning, the Hormuz dilemma and the Malacca dilemma, the Straits of Malacca, still continue to ensure that the tyranny of geography trumps all geostrategic initiatives which may take place. Because you can change the politics of the world, but you can't change the geography of the world. You really have to contend with geography as it stands structured. And therefore, it is in our interest, it is in India's interest to try and play as constructive a role in trying to see if there can be peace in the Middle East. And of course, we should not have delusions of grandeur that we will be able to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian question. A large number of people have tried. The last being, or the last person who had these delusions of grandeur was President Musharraf. I had the former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan once telling me that President Musharraf called him one night and asked him that if he could be sent a briefing note on the Israeli-Palestinian question. So this very able career diplomat thought that the general must have had an extra, and so therefore by the morning it would be gone. And so 2 days later there was another call saying, you've not sent the papers. And so he asked him, he says, well, what do you need the papers for? He said, no, I think I can sort out the Israeli-Palestinian issue. You know, there are some in our country also who suffer from those delusions of grandeur. So therefore, leaving that aside, what I think we must do if we also want to bring those trade corridors, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor into fruition, is to see how quietly, but in a very purposeful manner, we try and push the peace process, because, as I said, it is in our interest to ensure that these three concurrent conflicts, Russia, Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East, and of course, the perennial problem which the not too peaceful rise of China has created after the ascendancy of Xi Jinping, if we are able to, in some manner, navigate our way through this, I am sure by the time India completes 100 years of its independence in 2047, our time under the sun would come. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for releasing me early so I can go back to my day job.